So I've got Ben Cohen with me today. He was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He received a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an MFA from Indiana University. Cohen held a residency in Umbria, Italy, that deeply influenced his paintings. Since then, the landscape and character of his surroundings has remained the energizing force in his work. The artist currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. His work captures the familiar sights of his neighborhood using cropped, collaged, and simplified vistas to capture a concentrated experience that refers to both the interpersonal and the supernatural. Ben, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for doing this, Brian.
Of course, man. So, what would before we get into it? I this stood out to me. Like when you say that refers both to the interpersonal and the supernatural, what do you mean by that?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's everything.
What is everything? What like
Yeah. No, I think like what in a way the artist statement's tricky because you're trying to summarize everything that you're doing in your life into a few sentences. And um, painting, like since grad school, my paintings have taken longer and longer and longer for me to paint. And the longer I spend with a painting, kind of the deeper inside of myself I go. And and the things that I end up kind of settling on the most in my inner thoughts are like the relationships I have with other people and the experiences that I've had with them and the spiritual kind of religious supernatural experiences that I've had. So the paintings are kind of relatively mundane. They're just like kind of like all of Brooklyn sort of looks like that. It's all these sort of just semi-decorative brick and stone buildings with iron gates in front of them with like weeds growing over them. And so what I've done is I think I've somewhat successfully created a vocabulary for my paintings and for myself to sort of reflect visually on those experiences of people interacting together in the world, along with the kind of more spiritual, the unknown, I guess. I don't know. Like I've gone through a pretty dramatic evolution in the last 5 or 6 years religiously, and so whether it's God or just the great unknown or something, there's something mysterious about our world that is hard to grasp onto, and somehow making a painting for me is like the best way to sort of reflect on capturing that mystery. And so so that's what I mean. I think if that
yeah.
makes sense.
No, it does.
um
So are you like using like your imagery, like you were saying how you were kind of drawing upon these like mundane visual references or occurrences, like are you, I mean, do you sense that there's this like spiritual significance or like undertone or presence in these things?
yeah. You're actually getting after my secret topic. That's, when you ask, it's like every time I talk to an artist, this is like the secret topic I always want to talk about. But is so the question is, do the paintings have after? Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So I mean, like when you talk about the supernatural, are you implying that like you? I mean, the do you sense that there is like a supernatural like presence or energy or um uh like some kind of present reality in the midst of what would otherwise be considered like a banal or a common or everyday?
I think that's my hope. I think that's what I'm after, and that's the itch that keeps me coming back to the studio and painting kind of a similar motif again and again. And like I've had these kind of supernatural experiences with art in various places, and with a wide range of styles of art too. And it's hard to point at one thing and say like this is how to make a spiritual painting. And sometimes it's, you know, like there is like a presence in the painting or a presence coming out of the painting that's more than just like, oh, that's a nice painting. And so there's a sort of eeriness to that I would love to have in my paintings. Or at a certain point, I thought maybe my paintings could be some kind of a portal, like a literal kind of transitional space for the viewer to enter into a more supernatural state of mind.
Yeah, that kind of sounds like an icon or something like that.
Totally. And I love iconography, and I'm totally ripping off everybody in my paintings as far as iconography. And so I'm like directly referencing in my own way like Renaissance altarpiece compositions and things like that. And maybe like I really wanted to talk to you about the space in your paintings, and I'm, you know, I think we're both thinking about space really critically in our work, but my result is a little different than yours, maybe. And part of it is like I'm thinking more about like an up and down space, which is how I think of altarpieces are like yeah, Renaissance painting has like a deep space in it, or it can have a deep space, but really like it's more about the kind of vertical space of like terrestrial and oh man, I don't know, the ethereal space, and how those two things interact in a flat visual image. And so whether that's through the lining up of certain forms or the like rhyming of shapes into things, or echoing color throughout a composition, or actual like repeated motifs moving up and down, you know, I think those are all a part of what I'm using as the mechanics of like going after this kind of more like spiritual undertone. And I don't know if it works or not, but like every once in a while a painting starts to kind of do something interesting, and then it feels good.
You know, it's neat, man, because like I've heard it said that an icon is not it in of itself is not the thing. It's not the divine reality. It's not the you know, the heavenly you know, divine energy or object, you know, or form, but it's something that symbolically points to the very thing that it represents, right? So it's like the icon functions as something that sort of points to something like a reality that is greater than the object itself could ever be. But I've also heard that there are instances that there are times you're talking about how, like, you know, I think you said, did you say ethereal? But like how like the terrestrial and like the divine or the ethereal intersect, and it elevates the object into something. It brings it like elevates it into something that is holy, and in a sense that it's set aside, in the sense that it's like it becomes something other than what it was. You know, prior to that point of intersection, prior to that. And so it's interesting how, like, I wonder, you know, if there are instances as painters, certainly in the history of painting, where there have been painters that made something where an occurrence like that sort of in a sense elevated their, like, what they were participating in, like their painting, their, you know, their work, so that when other people are before it, when they encounter it, they're affected in a way that is indescribable. You know, they're caught unaware. You know, they encounter something that is more powerful than perhaps what they've experienced before with art, or there's like a profound energy to it, or there's a connection to it. And that to me is because I've certainly experienced that before, in my own way, and it was it's life changing, you know, and it's a moment, it's like a gift, that is presented, and then it's like you have it. Um, do you think that, or have you experienced that yourself? And do you think that that's a like? Do you think you're leaving yourself open for something like that to occur in your own work?
Yeah, I've definitely had the experience multiple times. And leaving myself open to having that experience. I think so. I think I'm leaving it open. I'm always trying new things and like pushing myself technically and conceptually to make better work. And also like for like the first 10 years of my painting life, I was really sort of dancing around that topic and not wanting to engage it directly because like the early 2000s were a tough time, not only for like representational artists, but as an observational painter, and grew up in an evangelical church, and so was like very engaged with that in art school during the Bush years. And to like want to have a conversation about religion and spirituality in painting was like a death sentence at the Art Institute of Chicago. And so there were a few, actually Frank Piatek taught a class called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And that was one of the most profound classes that I've ever had as a student, and continue to revisit the topics every day in my studio. Those ideas percolated for a few years until grad school, when I was really like, okay, I really want to have these conversations in my paintings. And that's when my work started dramatically change stylistically and technically, and then conceptually, like the work was sort of following this idea. So probably about since then, for the last 10 years, like I've been sort of pushing myself to target a conversation more and more concerning the spiritual in my own art. And then I would not identify myself as an evangelical anymore. And so I've sort of gone through what is now being called the deconstruction. And so that my work is sort of following my personal journey in that in that regard. But I one thing that happened to me, I think the first time I ever had that kind of spiritual experience with a piece of artwork was before I knew anything about art, and I went to the local art museum in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, and there was an Agnes Martin show in the rotunda. So it was just like 12 white paintings, and I walked in. I had no idea what I was looking at, but there was something really profound about these paintings. And like I wasn't a painter at the time. Like I was really interested in art and did a lot of stuff in school, just like elementary, middle school. I think maybe I might have been like 14 or 15 when I saw these, but I couldn't leave the room. I couldn't walk away from these paintings. I was there for a lot longer than I would have ever looked at something. And so that like really stuck with me. And then I had a similar experience at the Art Institute when I first started going there with, I kept going into this American room, in the American wing, there's a room of landscape paintings, and I couldn't walk past these landscapes. And, I'm like, who is this guy? I look at it and it's George Ennis, and I'm like, what is up with this guy? Like, they're not really any different than the other paintings in the room, but like, I can't leave these paintings. So I started researching him and found out that he was like super into Swedenborg. And like, I started reading about the Swedenborg cult thing, and like these a lot of really prominent designers and artists are sort of these like Swedenborg followers. And so I tried to kind of adopt some of that into my work because I thought, like it, it was interesting and it was like compelling. And so like roughly what a lot of the like Swedenborg stuff is like these kind of number and ratio systems that you can use visually to represent the heavenly realms. And
okay.
And so like downtown Chicago, Washington, DC, there's a lot of architects that base their work off of this. It's not the golden ratio, but it's like a ratio system that represents the kind of outer to inner court and the various levels of heaven that are believed to have been, this information was given to Swedenborg in the 1700s by an angel. And so like, I don't know like if it's real or not, but it makes really good paintings and really compelling architecture. And if I would go through George Inness books with tracing paper, and if you trace his things out abstractly, they become these really compelling geometric abstractions where he's lining up a lot of things with like center points. It's not the rule of thirds. He has this like whole other kind of crazy system. And it ends up looking a lot like Piet Mondrian's work like 40, 50 years later. And so like if you kind of look at their two works together, and Piet Mondrian, I could talk about this all day, but Piet Mondrian was also like a kind of mystical, like him and Kandinsky were kind of in this like shamanistic kind of spiritual thing where they were really actively trying to represent a kind of spiritual system in their work visually. And that's kind of what spawned a lot of abstraction in the early modernist period. But obviously like Kandinsky and Mondrian's work look drastically different. One's very spontaneous and kind of intuitive, and Mondrian's work, on the other hand, is extremely disciplined and careful. And so, here's where you have this kind of interesting gradation of sensibilities that I think are all kind of going after this sort of similar pursuit. And then, I don't know. I get really excited talking about that stuff. But
well, so you've incorporated some of your findings from those pursuits into your own work, like into your compositions and into like the way that you place like the pictorial elements and things like that.
Yeah, not in a like a literal, I need to have 5 flowers in this painting because there's 5 angels guarding the throne of God or something like that. But in a more intuitive way, I think I'm very conscious of the underlying geometry and abstractions in my paintings and how they create a sense of up and down and back and forth for the viewer's eye that may or may not be about a kind of spiritual dynamic or an interpersonal dynamic or something like that. And if you're like painting architecture and then I've reduced any kind of perspectival things in it. So my space is very flat, and I'm orienting the architecture to the edge of the work, to the edge of the painting. So there, it forces geometry to be a big kind of main component to the composition. And then, but I do get excited when I'm composing the work when there's like a 1, 2, 3 thing happening, or when there's like the repetitions of numbers, and like all of that it's not entirely on purpose, but it's definitely left intentionally when it happens. And I do a lot of drawings. So I'm like obsessively doodling in a book with ideas for arranging compositions. And then I go on scavenger hunts looking for things in the actual world that represent these drawings. And so there's a kind of back and forth between my imagination and the real world, and then like digital compositions, and then painting. And I revise things in the process of painting pretty consistently. Um, so that's sort of a rough outline of my working method, I think.
It's wonderful, man. Thank you for sharing that. It's always a fascinating thing for me to hear about the process of another painter. And it sounds like, man, like you're aligning, like your process is incredibly informed, by your life experiences, by your values, like what's important to you, your desires. And it sounds like it's an incredibly engaging and wonderful pursuit. So man, that's I'm excited to hear about that. Yeah, that's great, man. That's great. And thanks for sharing. So so you want to talk about space. What's on your mind regarding that?
Yeah, well, so you had this kind of open call to have this conversation. We've never talked before, but I'm a huge fan of your paintings, and one of the things that I find so compelling about your work is your manipulation of space. And like I remember commenting one time about like, oh, I'm getting like serious Stanley Spencer vibes from you. I don't know if you are. So
Yeah.
part of what I'm interested in is just like what I am a lover of cubism and kind of modernist spaces and distortions and things like that. And so I'm really curious to hear from you, kind of like, how do you go from a plein air painting to the work that I see behind you on the wall and that I've seen on your website and whatnot, where there's these really like wild spatial distortions, and the viewer, it's like your painting is static, but me as the viewer is like changing positions, looking at all over the place in your painting. And so I'm curious, like, how do you go from an observational painting to a very invented painting at the end, and what artists or experiences have influenced you along the way, or do you find yourself thinking about those things in the studio?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that foremost for me as a painter, what has been the primary way for me to work has been to connect with something that is alive and present, moving, that has a pulse. There's a measure of vitality to it. So, I for whatever reason, I've always had a connection to the landscape, and I think that the landscape is something where it's an interesting thing. It's very dynamic, right? So on the one hand, it can be this place. It could be a sacred place, a place that is set aside where like a private or secret room of sorts. There's movies and stories about secret gardens and these sort of hidden realms and realities, and certainly that comes from getting lost in nature and sort of finding these stumbling upon these instances of beauty, the unexpected beauty, and discovering something new, and how it garnishes the soul. It somehow enlivens it, and I've certainly experienced that. I was born in California and spent a lot of time in the northern part of California in the mountains. We had a cabin near Tahoe, and we would go there every summer and winter. And so there was a lot of this unbridled wildness that I, as a child, grew up in, and just witnessed the terrible, and awesome things. Learning how to shoot as a kid to protect myself from rattlesnakes or mountain lions or bears. It's like these are realities when you're living out there. And it was
You're a frontiersman.
Yeah, well, my parents and grandparents were. I just was along for the ride. But I learned how to cross country ski out there. They had snowmobiles. It was like and the place was remote. Like there wasn't like a main road. You would have to actually kind of hike in And so it was, but it was wonderful. And I learned how to fish out there. All kinds of wonderful things happen out there. And so I think having grown up in that and having had access to it, when I'm in the landscape, I can just easily slip back, into that. So there have been many times I've been comforted by, of course, nature, but also threatened by it, and I like the uncertainty and the edginess of that. That it keeps me alert, um, and that works its way into the painting. So for me, yeah, I mean, I do have like I'm certainly a romantic, but I do not seek to be a sentimentalist. So there's a when I paint in the landscape, I'm going after something that's more kind of raw, to my experiences, and a large part of that, you know, has to do with um, the way that I see, uh, you know, like forms, the way that I read them, and light and all that kind of stuff, and probably like you, I was trained, in some sense, especially in graduate school. The Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, was trained classically. There's an undertone of that, especially with the history of the school. But being being an MFA student, we were encouraged to, of course, go well beyond that, and to pursue other things. And so I was learning how, in a sense, to find my way through that. Um, so I would sort of interact with the landscape or interact with the figure or like an interior space or a still life or something, and push myself to go beyond just the empirical, like the easily observed, quote unquote reality, of what was before me. But that was a great place to start, to learn how, in a sense, to do those things. But then what's beyond that? And what keeps me coming back to it? Um, and so, I was introduced to artists that like Edwin Dickinson in graduate school, who is someone that pushed, who was someone that introduced a new way of seeing to me, a different way of seeing to me. And I was quite taken with the obscurity of his vision. Um, and it seemed to me to be something that was incredibly genuine, for him. Um, and so that helped me to understand that there was something there, right?
Hmm.
And of course, it helped, so it helped me to also understand, other painters that I thought I thought I could see, but really didn't see. I was sort of, treating them in a superficial manner, um, like Monet, for example. And I've shared this before, uh, like Monet was someone that at first I loved, and then I hated, or just distrusted, and then loved even more, and then before. And it's for these reasons. It's because I look at painting in a very different way now, and I relate to the visible world in a very different way than I used to. A painter who's helped me with that is Stanley Lewis. Because, when I was teaching at the University of South Carolina, I had a colleague who had formed a really good friendship with Stanley, and Stanley would send these, like, he would do these like super fast paintings, like
Hmm.
crazy, fast paintings, and he would send them down to my friend, and we would put them up on the wall and just try to figure out what the heck is going on. And we would have these
Yeah.
really wonderful talks about it. And it was this like invitation, to really begin to experience something, new and different, to encounter something different, and uh, or just to see what I had been encountering my whole life, in a different way. And so, Stanley was asked 1 year to come and lecture, and he gave a couple of lectures, and of course I went to every single one. And I just was so blown away by his the I was blown away by his connections, like how he would connect one artist to another artist, and which seemingly they would have nothing to do with each other, or like one movement in the history of painting to another one, like Claude Lorraine to, Egyptian carvings and hieroglyphs, and I'd be like, what is happening?
Yeah, I
But
don't see
it
that
was a,
one.
but he would make it accessible.
Right. That's
He would
cool.
make it accessible. Yeah. So in a way, it's like he was peeling back. He was kind of like kind of lifting the veil in a sense, and it wasn't like the veil to everything, but it was a veil to something. And that, of course, wasn't the end all be all. It is one more invitation into something even beyond that, into something beyond that, and it's this like, I find it to be and it's really kind of endless in a way. And so when you were talking about the supernatural, we're talking about the having the awareness, or like, the sense that something miraculous, something beyond the natural, greater than the natural, more abstract in a sense, almost inaccessible, is what is enacting the natural, is what is the virtue of the natural. It's the beauty of it. It's like the life, the vitality of it, and it's the actuality, the actualization of it, and it's like, it's and that is what in painting, or that's what I'm going after in my work, so the but it's funny because, it's sort of like I'm using my sensibilities to do this. And so I remember the first time I was reading this book by William V. Dunning, something like changing pictorial imagery and history of painting or something like that. And has to do, and he makes some really neat connections and comparisons to like these different movements in painting and imagery and pictorial space and color and all that kind of stuff, different systems and everything. But I went and saw this. I saw. I was in Italy, and I was teaching to the Jerusalem Studio School during the summer, course, and
Was
Civita,
that in
Italy, and we
Siena?
that was in
I'm sorry.
Civita, Castellana, like, but we went like all around,
Oh, okay.
man. Like we went to like
Yeah, yeah.
Umbria, we went like all these different places, and we kind of took the PRO trail, and we saw these different frescoes, and they were just amazing. And we saw like Masaccio and Giotto, and just blew our minds.
Yeah, that was the
But
one
it
that's the like residency that I did in 2006. Um
okay.
so I was there with it was before they moved to that location, and it was held in Monte Castello di Vibio. So Israel Hirschberg was there with the Jerusalem Studio School along with some other faculty from the state, and it was one of the most profound experiences of my life for sure. So I'm just interrupted you. You were there. You were there as a teacher, not as a
Yeah.
student. Okay, that's
Well,
super cool.
I could say I was certainly there as a student, but yeah, I was teaching too. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean? And it's the kind of
yeah,
thing where it's like, man, to really encounter these frescoes in person, and the scale and the angles, from which they're viewed, and it blew me away. And
yeah,
I was already beginning to like think about things differently. I had dismantled, deconstructed, the systems that I had been using up until that time to paint to paint by, and even systems that I hadn't even realized that I was using. I just deconstructed everything, and it dramatically affected the way my work looked, and my work was, terrible for a long time. But like, yeah, because I had to start from the ground up. I had to start all over again, and like, because the vernacular that I was using to paint with was no longer satisfied. It couldn't express what I had begun to experience and what I began to see,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in other paintings. And here's the thing, where it's like, as I began to see these things occurring in these paintings or in these frescoes, like, then I began to see it happening in like the world around me, in my environment. And it completely blew my mind, and still does, because it's not like a static experience. It's like it continues to evolve and grow, right? And so, and I really have not found a way to paint what I visually experience yet, but I'm working on it. And so I saw this Piero fresco. It was the Resurrection, and was looking up at it, and it was like all of a sudden I just saw these things happening in the fresco that I just would have never seen before. And I thought, I was like, well, man, I'm just making all this stuff up. This has got to be crazy. So I started talking to Israel about it. And I was like, do you see what's happening here? Isn't crazy? And he was like, huh, like that's, you probably thought I was a little nuts. Um, but but I really believe those things were happening, and it was the first time that I began to understand that like a painting really is like a moving image. It's a moving image, and it functions on multiple levels, right? Which sounds pretty simple and straightforward, like an obvious thing, but the implications of it and how that is realized in the making of a painting is everything. And like we talk about uh space, for example, and the decisions that govern these spatial constructs, and how the space is arrived at, you know how it is constructed and deconstructed, and how is it formed, and all these things. And so when I'm painting in plein air, and I'm like on location, and I've said this before, and I do think this is a thing where it's like, I think to paint plein air, just to kind of like, for the sake of painting plein air, I think in of itself is a pretty, I think that's a silly pursuit. In the sense that like, in the sense that you know that is not an end. It's a means to an end, but it's
Right.
not an end in of itself. And so it's always been meant to usher us further into something beyond that, and um, and even some of the greatest painters that we consider like the greatest painters felt the same way. And we look at Corot. He didn't even consider his plein air paintings. It was the younger painters that were like, "Damn, dude, these are incredible." And he was like, "What? Those? Are you kidding me?" Right? But it's like plein air does offer so much.
Mm-hmm.
It offers so much, and it teaches us how to connect to something visually immediately. It helps us to like take vast amount of ever-changing visual information and to make decisions about that. It teaches us to come to terms with what we value and what we desire. And it also helps us come to terms with being completely out of control. and but moving forward regardless, and that's I love painting and planner because I love I love interacting with something, participating with this uh with the virtue and the magnitude of the landscape of nature, and that includes people, and I love how alive and how commanding it is and how demanding it is, and so I'm always uh like I never quite measure up when I paint in planner, and I always fall short, but I like that. I like I like not being able to get on top of something. I like not being able to to mantle it, and to feel like I have control over it. I like feeling I like the chase. I like the hunt. I like the fight, the struggle. I like getting beat up, not like in real life, but like in this
Yeah.
in this context, right?
Right.
I'm certainly not like a sadist or anything, but but I love the challenge. And I love how I come so close to being obliterated. And many times I feel like I have been, right? But then I get back to the studio, and maybe a couple days later, because I always hate what I make on I do. It's funny. My wife knows whether or not I've had a good painting, you know, session. If I come back and I hate the painting, she's like, "Oh, you're gonna love it in 2 days. Don't worry about it." You know.
My wife asked me last night at this. She asked me if I won because I was like, "How was your day?" We were talking about her day, and then she was like, "So how was the studio? Did you win?" I thought that was the first time she'd ever asked me that. That was really funny. But
Huh.
uh, yeah, no, I totally understand all the your motivations for painting outside, which are why I don't paint outside anymore. I actually love plein air painting, and I do it all the time when I'm like on vacation. I do like vacation painting. But then people have asked me like, "Oh, do you make your work? Have you ever tried to make your work plein air?" And like, you can't do it because there's a demand from the outdoors that keeps you outside of your head, and like, but somehow I think you're able to hold on to that kind of chaos and that sense of alertness, and kind of like, oh, like everything could happen, anything could happen at any moment, and it like your finished work kind of keeps that. So like, do you have strategies for sort of holding on to that state of being?
I mean, not. I mean, like every painter, like we all use systems, that are ever changing and evolving and being abandoned and you know, but yeah, I mean, I love this painter Leon Kossoff, right? And he often would work from his drawings. So he would go around and make these drawings, like just of the thing. He'd go for a walk in the morning and just make drawings of things that he would see, things that would kind of be of interest to him, subjects and things. And he'd go back to the studio and make paintings from these drawings. Big paintings. Like these are like paintings that, like, I mean, you've got to like stop and really contemplate these things. They're they're really something to behold, and I mean, they have a lot of magnitude to them and a lot of force to them. But I read somewhere that in one of his books, he was talking about how for him, he he realized that he had to cultivate just his visual memory, um, and how important that was for the work. And so that that really stood out to me, and I was like, well, I gotta cultivate my visual memory. And kind of at the same time, I was reading this other book that were these like letters that were written by Camille Pissarro to his son Lucien, and in those letters, and he would talk about how both he, Pissarro, and Cezanne would work from nature. It's sort of like, in a sense, try to forget everything they've learned, through the academy and through their training, and sort of find their true nature as a painter in nature, right? And so it was about kind of discovering their sensibilities, and so there was this abandonment of the classical systems, and sort of, and with everything emptied, there was nothing. There was just only, they could only be filled as like a receptacle, just like learning from nature, and but like this way that's informed. They weren't like naive and innocent by any means, like, right? I mean, they were. You're right. So I mean, they were informed,
Yeah.
but they were pursuing something that was way beyond their scholastic, academic training, and could only really be found by engaging with nature. And it was really, I believe it was the virtue of nature, where they found their sensibilities, and or I should say, they cultivated their sensibilities, and in this what seems to be chaos, but it's really you have to bring order into chaos. You don't really make order out of chaos, right? You bring it into chaos. And so, like, that's the whole idea of how does one survive living in nature? You've got to get organized, and you've got to learn how to, like, stay alive, and the only way to do that is to bring
Mm-hmm.
order into this, what seems to be just pure chaos, right? And but it's
Right.
but it's not chaos. It really is systems of patterns, but systems of patterns that we didn't make, right? So what we have to adapt, and we have to, in a sense, become subject to these systems so that we find our place in them, and then we seek to overcome them or to tame them, in a sense, right? But by taming them, we ourselves become wild, which is sort of like, that's sort of the exchange that I've been making in my work, when I paint, and with the landscape. So I was reading these letters, and I was thinking about, well, how do I cultivate my sensibilities? How do, I'm willing to abandon whatever systems I need to do this. um, and so when I was thinking about cultivating visual memory, and I was thinking about the significance of, like, developing my sensibilities, and really paying attention to that. And at the same time, the way that I was interpreting my visual world was, like, drastically changing. And even the way that I would encounter and interact with paintings, other paintings. And so that all kind of, I think, led me to this way of working that, really is simply just me trying to paint what I experience. And like within any language, there's a limitation, but both the one who is using the language, right, and just the constraints of the language itself. And so, in this particular sense, certainly me, that it's my own constraints that limits the capacity for me to express these experiences within the language of painting. And so all I can do is seek to push, to seek to, like, you know to see how I can express more, or to do it in a way that is more accurate, or um and it's hard. It's just really hard, man. And so the way that the space is activated in each work is simply a result of me working at doing these things.
And
So it's,
you're revisiting the same or like similar places again and again.
mhm.
And so when you're working on a painting in the studio, you're does this happen where you go back to that spot, you make new paintings, you come back, something that you did that day like informs a previous painting, and that gets like worked in, so then you're sort of combining multiple experiences into a singular painting? Is that happening?
Oh, Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so okay, so I'm the kind of person, I wish I could be the kind of person that reads like one book at a time. But I read like I read like it's embarrassing to tell you how many books I read at one time and hardly ever finish. But like, it's like I'm just into so many books and I'm reading so many books at one time. And but it helps in a sense to sort of expand my range of vision, right? In a sense. And there are times when like I need to go wider and broader, and there are times I need to go deeper, right? And so I'll kind of like focus in on one particular book and really like chew on that for a while. And I relate to paintings in a very similar way. I'll work on, multiple paintings at once, a variety of different scale and with all different stages of process, and yeah, so if I go and a lot of my decisions are based on the constraints that I have with the responsibilities to my family and just the daily things, and so but I go to visit these places and spend time in these places, and yeah, one painting will certainly inform another, um, and each painting really does become this uh, this it's like a combined set of experiences, a combined set of like understanding. It doesn't just all happen like all at once in a very singular way with one painting. Everything is informing everything else. And so the figures which are invented and and like there are certain times the element I mean a lot of the elements in the work will be invented as well. And but it's in order to point to something that is real, and so like it's so the painting is expressing something that is very real to me. I'm inventing a lot in order to be able to do that, it's like I mean it's kind of like, well, I'll just invent a word. I'll make a sound. It's like inventing a sound to create meaning, and then say, okay, well, this sound means this, and that's what I'm using to express this meaning, so I kind of do the same thing in a sense with my paintings in each picture that's being made.
Hmm. Do you have any rules for yourself, or like rules and or boundaries that you put on yourself? Like this doesn't happen in a painting, or I always have to have these elements, or something like that.
Not really, I I had a heck of a time living in Philadelphia, because there were a lot of rules there that kind of just pissed me off, and so
You're
I
talking
didn't
about PAFA specifically, or like
I'm
Philadelphia
talking
as
about
a
the
city?
city, which I love the
Really?
city.
Okay.
I love the city of Philadelphia. It gets into you, man. It really does. But there were so many things about living there that just pissed me off. Like I feel like, well, do things really have to be this difficult? Like there are easier solutions, but so I became like really kind of rebellious against rules in a way that caught me by surprise. It's like, you see how well I know myself, but it's like, oh, I don't like to follow these rules, where I thought I'd always been okay with, but I really have, I think in a sense, I have problems with just these like rules that are being applied, however, I do have a lot of rules for my own way of living, but that are a result of my personal values. And there's a sort of hierarchy within that, to keep it structured and to have an orderly way of living. Um, and the sort of code of conduct of sorts, which is more at the superficial level, but there's a deeper current that governs all that,
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so I guess when I paint, that's the one place where I have the freedom to make or unmake,
Hmm.
you know, uh, when I feel it is necessary. And I guess that's really it. Like, I mean, I definitely, like, I hold myself to a very high standard when I paint. And that would be, I think that's a rule for myself, is just what I
Okay.
expect out of myself, making work. I often find that I have to give my paintings a lot of time. I used to try to just paint real fast, And I think that came out of like being like sort of initially like a plein air painter. You just got to paint
Hmm.
super fast, right?
You can paint the whole
Um,
painting in like 15 minutes.
right, yeah. And it's like, oh, what did you really see? I didn't see anything. I basically let a system see for me, and I just copied. I just copied it. Like there's nothing in that. For me, I want something that's alive, and I want something that has vitality, and magnitude and force to it. That. But I also like, but I don't want it just to be is this explosion. I like the quietude of like Morandi.
Hmm.
His work is contemplative. Like you have to like really be quiet, still before it. And it's like nature, because in nature, you go into the woods, the only time you really see things move is when you're still.
Right.
And Morandi's work is like that. Like once I become still before his work is full of movement. It's crazy how much that work moves. It's
Hmm.
really, really alarming. But it also points to how how much he understood movement, like how much he understood space and the behavior of space and the articulation of it, and the behavior of form and like the inherent gesture of form in space and like all of those things, like there's just so much that he understood. Like it's such a deep and profound level that he can make these paintings which appear very simple, but they do not lack any amount of sophistication. If anything, they're some of the most sophisticated paintings I've ever seen.
Yeah. What keeps
um
you from making a Morandi painting? Like, so I asked that. This is a question I ask myself all the time, as a fellow Morandi obsessed painter, of like
yeah.
what keeps you from just putting down your brushes and quitting versus like trying to remake a Morandi painting. Like because part of what I'm always like, how can I make a Brooklyn landscape that's a fusion between Joseph Albers and Giorgio Morandi or something. Like that's like
Oof. Yeah.
how do I start
Yeah.
my studio day? But so for you, it's like
Yeah.
the, I think in a way your paintings have like adopted some of that sensibility of time and space where like I get such a joy out of seeing one of your new paintings because I haven't already discovered the secrets in it, and like you always are like hiding things in a way that takes time. Like it takes me sometimes like almost a minute to like find what I think is everything in the painting, and not necessarily in like a Where's Waldo kind of way, but like the like how things sort of flip and reveal and like little pockets of space that you've hidden in a landscape or something like that. And so in a way, Morandi's doing all of that, but he does it in such a simple kind of frontal way that makes the paintings kind of surprising. So like I see that happening in your work, and that's an observation. And to make it a question, do you like are those things that you're like, okay, I like where this figure is, but I want to like slow it down. What would Morandi do? Are you doing that?
Well, I mean, like in a way, it's so yeah. So when I bring a work back into the studio and I'm no longer painting on location, then the subject becomes the painting, right? And so then it's the long, arduous process of like of coming to terms with what the painting is at this point and where it wants to go, like what it wants to become, you know. And that takes time, which is why I realized I have to give my paintings time to evolve and to like to mature, and change. And it's really because I need the time, in a sense, to interpret that and to like become empathetic to it, and not to keep myself from like imposing, you know, um, in a way that is against the inherent movement of the painting itself, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that's really important to me. And so like when I think about a painter like Morandi who would set up these objects, like he had this intention. He wanted to choreograph and set up something, or I believe oftentimes was informed by something else visually that he would observe, and then he'd want to like live into that experience and remake that, recreate it, and really spend time contemplating it in his work. Like that certainly is something that I do in my work too. Not necessarily thinking to myself, well, how would Morani do this, but more in the sense of like as a response to like what the painting is needing at this particular moment. How do I make that happen? And I think about Bonnard actually quite often, in those particular cases, because Bonnard is someone who is a complete mystery to me, in almost every single way. And I love that about his work. I really cannot figure him out. I mean, and whenever I think I do, I realize I'm just being a fool, because then I always see something else, and I'm like, oh well, okay. And so I really, it's important to me to like when I develop the work in the studio, I really need to like spend time with it, and not like touch on it too much. I had a critic in grad school who gave me this really awesome pearl of wisdom. He said, and we were talking about how do you go back into a painting, and he said, don't paint on the painting, paint the
Oh,
painting. Yeah. I was like,
that's interesting.
wow. Yeah. And like, at the time, being this grad student, I didn't really, I mean, I kind of thought I knew what he's talking about, but didn't really understand what he's talking about. But that was actually something huge. And so, well, that's a big deal for me. So when I go back into the work, painting the painting is really what it's about, not painting on the painting, right? And
Hmm.
there's a big difference, a huge difference in that, right?
Yeah.
um, and so that's something that I seek to do, bringing the painting along, helping it along in its development, so that it reaches this this place of being realized, you know,
Hmm.
um, where the form of the painting and the narrative, you know, are they kind of reach a fullness. And I don't I don't know 100% that it ever does, but it reaches a point of fullness or state of fullness that maybe it's as far as I can take it.
Yeah. I
And
feel like
and
a
I just
painting's
I
always
stop there.
done when you can bring a painting to the point, so like precipice. It's like one more decision is either going to destroy the painting completely forever, or it'll just sort of bring it back to where you started. Like I feel like
Mm,
that's like when the painting's done. It's never
yeah.
perfect. It never does
No.
exactly what I want it to do. But do
Right.
you feel like you parent in a similar way? You're this is like a big picture
Well, that's a
question.
whole different thing, man.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, yeah, surely every child is different, you know.
Hmm. But
And
do you parent on the child or do you parent into
I
the
see, I see,
child?
I see what you mean. No, no, no. Yeah, no. That's actually a really important distinction. And I
Hmm.
haven't thought about it in that way, but you're right. Like it's true. To parent the child as opposed to parenting on the child, right? There's a condescension that happens where it's like you meet the child where they are, and instead of like approaching something punitively, you approach it in a way that is more disciplinary in the sense that you're uh, exercising patience, kindness, long suffering, love, gentleness, meekness, in order not to extinguish the life of this child, who is like testing the limits in every possible way, right?
Yeah.
But instead to use it as a teaching experience, a learning experience for the child, and helping them develop the qualities that you see in them that are good, that are good in the sense that they have life in them, um, in those qualities, the aspects of who they are, and to help bring that out,
Hmm.
is really important to me.
That's cool.
I have to tell you, Ben, I don't know why this is happening, but the charger for my computer is not charging. My computer is
Uh-oh.
about to die.
Oh
Um,
no. Okay.
so I have to call it, man. But I would love to talk with you again. This has been great.
Definitely.
Really enjoyed our conversation, man. And I feel like I spent entirely too much time talking about myself, and I would have loved to hear more about you and your work, and what's going on in your world. But thank you so much, man, for being
Definitely,
here
Brian.
today and for talking painting with me, man. I really enjoyed it.
I love it. This was a highlight for sure. Yeah, hit
Cool,
me up
man.
anytime. I'd love to do it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well,
Thanks.
we'll be in touch, dude.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Take care, man.
Bye.
Bye.